Okay, so back to the UN and the inability to read each other's logic. And by the way, logic, we're talking about the dictionary, we're talking about language here, but logic comes from the idea of language, logos, speech, reason, words. Words are just like concretization of the mind for the sake of communication. So that is the background. We're not just talking about English words here, but so we're sitting in the United Nations. We're all using the same global dictionary of, say, English diplomatic terms, but we're reading entirely different underlying definitions into the most basic words of international relations. So let's walk through some of those translations because they're staggering when you lay them out side by side. And remember, when we say language, we're not always talking about exact same words, and sometimes we're going to be talking about same areas of life that like the same kinds of concepts, but completely different interpretations in each person's head. So it's really about the language of understanding, the source of language, which is understanding, not just the surface level words we're using. So let's take the word security. And to the West, security fundamentally means, or primarily conjures up, stability. It means open borders, free trade agreements, international law, protecting your sovereignty. It means you are relying on treaties, you are relying on alliances, orderly streets, systems that work, trust in the framework. Security is something you build into the system, so you don't have to think about it all the time. But do you want to do the Middle Eastern understanding of that reality?
Yeah, the understanding of security in the Middle East neighborhood. Security means hard power. It means thick concrete walls. It means multi-layered Iron Dome missile batteries and the demonstrated real ability to strike anyone who threatens you. We've already talked about with Iran and their experience in their war with Iraq in the early 90s. It's terrifying. It's a bit like the Middle Eastern neighborhood's a bit more like downtown Chicago, say, in a rough district. You don't rely on the system to protect you. Security is what you can personally enforce. It's the visible, it's the physical. It's like security is synonymous with undeniable physical dominance. It's quite a macho neighborhood, isn't it?
It really is. That's a good way of putting it. So what about the word peace? When a Western diplomat says peace process, what do they actually mean versus the resistance axis?
Well, the Western definition of peace is the permanent absence of conflict. It's this idea of shaking hands on the White House lawn. We saw that with Clinton and Arafat. I think it was Clinton, agreeing to compromise.
Yeah, it's a win-win scenario when everyone gets a little bit of what they want and they go home, they build their economy. Things get better, you know?
But for the resistance axis, the definition is absence of the opposition to God's will. So peace is not a compromise. Compromise is with the corrupt entity. And peace ultimately is the end result of total victory over them. Any treaty signed before that total victory is merely a tactical pause, a Hudna, to rearm, to prepare for the next phase of the cosmic war. And I remember seeing in Israel, when we're in the city, Jerusalem, the old city, there was a picture on an Arab wall with a dove on the wall. And everyone was saying, oh, that's lovely, dove, peace. But our guide was explaining to us that in the mindset that we're talking about here, the dove does mean peace, but it doesn't look the same. It means death of the infidel. It means victory over those who are opposing God's will. So it just explained the disconnect there.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word Hudna.
Hudna, yeah. This is a really useful thing to help us actually see into the mindset a bit more. So in Arabic, it means a truce or a ceasefire, but it's not peace. It's not final peace. And this is where it gets really interesting, because when we hear ceasefire in the West, we hear it all the time in negotiations. We're kind of like hearing de-escalation. We're hearing this movement towards peace. We're maybe even hearing like a resolution. But Hudna, it doesn't mean that at all. It means we're stopping for now. It means we're pausing. The conflict isn't over. The underlying reality hasn't changed. The intention hasn't changed. This is just a break.
Yeah, and we've seen it becoming actually a strategic pause, haven't we?
Yeah, time to regroup. It's time to rearm, maybe rethink, maybe.
Yeah, strategic pause, but not reconciliation at all. We could infer maybe that even talks are seen in the same way. When the West says, but they're talking, it's okay. And they're saying, yes, on the other side, we're happy to talk. But really, they're preparing to fight again when the time is right. And talking itself, as we've seen here, becomes part of the process. It becomes time to regroup. It becomes time to reload it, time to get ready again. And we've seen it over and over again. And in the West, it's just so difficult to even grasp that mindset. We literally don't see it. That idea when ships came to America and the Native Americans couldn't see them because they weren't expecting to see them. I saw that in this film. What's it called? What the bleep do we know? It's an interesting take on the quantum world and the implications on that. It's a bit like that for us.
Yeah, I know that story. And although, to be fair, that's actually a bit of a myth, that whole Native Americans not seeing ships thing. But
oh, okay, interesting.
It's not really grounded historically.
But anyway, the psychology behind it is what I'm trying to get across here. That is very real. And actually, there's a term for it in the psychological world. It's called inattentional blindness. So basically, it's you could be looking straight at something, but if you don't have the framework for it, you won't register it. You just don't register it.
Wow. So in effect, you don't see what you're not prepared to see.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And that's what we're dealing with here, this deep paradigm difference. We're hearing the same words, we're looking at the same situation, but we're not actually registering what the other side means, like where the other side is in their head. And it's there, but we just can't see it.
And meanwhile, Israel is having to deal with this on a regular basis, aren't they? This isn't theoretical, it's lived. And this is why we want to move on to this term called mowing the grass here. In Hebrew, kisoah hadeshe. I think I've got that right. Basically, the understanding that you don't eliminate the threat, you manage it through these repeated controlled operations. It's speaking straight into this dynamic that we struggle to even fathom. And just by the way, the idea of Hudna actually goes back to something called the Treaty of... I can't read that. Hudaybiyyah. Anyway, it's Muhammad and his followers, and they were on their way to Mecca for a pilgrimage, and they were stopped. And instead of fighting, a truce was made, and that's the Hudna. And so that literally means a calm or a quieting down or a pause. And in this story, it wasn't peace. It wasn't a truce. It only lasted a couple of years, and then the conflict resumed, and that led to the conquest of Mecca, quite a big part of the Quran, of the history at least. So even in that early example, you see the pattern. It's not resolution, it's timing over years, and that gives you an insight into the kind of timescales we're talking about here, long time horizons, multigenerational thinking.
Yeah, whereas the West, we're often thinking 4-year election cycles, aren't we? Like a totally different kind of frame of mind, really. And by the way, we've got to be clear. We're not saying that this is a universal interpretation across all kind of Muslim or Islamic thought. But when you look at groups like Hamas, when you look at groups like Hezbollah, and we look at the leadership of Iran, the actual actors Israel is dealing with, the more hardline religiously framed mindsets, this does seem to be the interpretation being played out on the ground here. And Israel fundamentally knows that, experientially knows that. So what looks to us like a move towards peace is, in that frame, entirely something else, a temporary pause, not a peace, but much longer strategy. So yeah, this isn't theoretical. Hamas have actually said in stuff over the years, I think in the early 2000s, about it being a long-term Hudna, even decades without recognising Israel. We're pausing, we're not changing our stance on Israel There are a few examples here, actually. Khaled Mashal, I think it's like 2004 to 2008. He was saying similar things like, we could do a long-term truce, but not an actual peace. In 2006, Ismail Haniyeh, I think that's how you say it. Again, he was talking about ceasefires, but not ending the conflict. So in practice, you've actually seen some of the longest quiet periods, like after 2014 with that Gaza war. And that stretched for several years, relatively speaking. It wasn't total peace, but it was enough of peace or enough of a lull and a long enough time to regroup, a long enough time to rearm, rebuild their capacity. And during that time, they were stockpiling rockets. They were strengthening their infrastructure. And even as we've seen recently, this must have been the time that they were building out those extensive tunnel networks underground, which Israeli military reports and multiple investigations, they've been documenting them over years. I remember actually hearing it on the news and there being big pushback. No, of course not. It's not happening. But it's definitely been revealed that that was the case. The tunnel network was fundamental to the Hudna plan. What do we do in the pools? And sadly, the funding that went for aid appears to have been funneled into the restocking during the Hudna, according to various reports and intelligent assessments. Diverted into that infrastructure. And from Israelis' perspective, this isn't theoretical, is it?
This is why we see things like the blockades. For the West, again, looks brutal, absolutely brutal from the outside, but it starts to make more sense from Israeli point of view. They're trying to limit the flow of materials that can be used to build rockets, especially during the Hudna periods, tunnels, military infrastructure, because they've seen repeatedly how these materials get repurposed. We talk about ammonium nitrate, Beirut. It can get repurposed into weapons that are going to be fired over the non-border, really, that there is between Gaza and Israel. It's literally there in their neighborhood. So, that's a bit hard to stomach for the West. We see restriction, we see cruelty, and yes, it does have its knock-on effect. It's kind of like inevitable, but they don't want abilities to be able to continue doing what they're doing on a long time scale. So we just see restriction in the West. We don't see the reasoning behind it. And to be honest, this is one of the logic moments that just putting two and two together, it's like, it's really bad that there's a blockade of Gaza, but there is a reason for it. And if I was in charge, I would probably do the same thing.
Yeah, and separately, you've got the tunnel networks, especially those smuggling tunnels through Egypt. Entire underground systems operating to bring in weapons, materials, resources, and they're bypassing official controls under the ground. Going back to this stockpiling idea of the Hudna, that even when there's a ceasefire, there's a whole layer of activity going on underneath the ground of the ceasefire, but also physically under the ground. And what we're calling peace is actually what they call time to restock. And so from that lens, if it's given, you take it. And it's just a part of the overall strategy. And it does make sense.
Yeah, and the other thing which came to light when we were talking is the news cycle moves on. We talked about this before. The West kind of forgets about it, especially during a big piece, but like 7 years worth that I think we were saying the last one was. The news is on to the next thing, the Ukraine, the elections, the climate, whatever the current headline is. Gaza drops out of focus because it looks quiet. There's no rockets, no headlines,
Well, not quite no rockets. There were rockets all the way through, just not the kind that makes global news. Sporadic, every few weeks or whatever. And I think they did that to keep the pressure on.
Yeah. So maybe not complete peace on the ground in Israel. And that's the point. That's what we're saying this for, because the lens moved away. So from the outside, it feels like stability, but maybe underneath, the dynamic hasn't stopped at all. Maybe it's accelerated. And the military know that. They don't forget that. They're watching that the whole time. They're tracking the build-up. They're tracking the infrastructure. They're tracking the patterns. They're hearing their intel. They know something is coming.